Over the last few years, I have fallen in love with retro horror games. There's just something about them that feels so different from what modern horror games have to offer. Last year, I played through all of the original Silent Hill games, and just this past month, I finally played the original Resident Evil. One aspect of these old-school survival horror games that stands out is that the developers had to work around the limitations of the hardware at the time to bring their vision to life. Whether it be pre-rendered backgrounds, fog, fixed camera angles, or tank controls, all of those aspects of the game design were born out of developers' attempts to work around what was and was not possible. It's the reason why so few big-budget games utilize pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, and tank controls today. They simply aren't needed anymore since the technology has evolved and those limitations no longer exist. However, just because something was born out of limitation doesn't mean that it is inherently bad. Actually, many people have very fond feelings and memories surrounding what could be considered dated or janky game design. As indie games have risen in popularity over the years, gamers have been able to get their pick of just about any game they could possibly desire, with thousands of developers' unique visions ranging from dating sims, roguelites, cat games, and of course retro-style horror games. Unlike modern AAA gaming, indie developers still often face limitations when creating games, not because of the hardware, but for other reasons such as budget constraints. However, we have also reached an age now where many indie developers are people who have grown up with these older survival horror titles. They recognize the beauty regardless of the limitations and seek to create games that remind them of the games they enjoyed growing up. Of course, I don't claim to know the inner workings of every indie game developer out there, but I imagine that a combination of budget limitations and nostalgia are what lead many developers to creating retro-style games. With all of that being said, although indie developers often take inspiration from older games, we have also learned so much about game design since the 90s. Because of that, indie developers have the chance to create games that evoke nostalgic feelings of the games we would play as kids, while also using the lessons gained over decades of game design. Which brings us to the topic of today's video. Crow Country is a survival horror game, developed by SFB Games and recently released in May of 2024. Crow Country follows our main character Mara, as she arrives at the abandoned Crow Country amusement park searching for the owner, Edward Crow, as he has recently been reported missing by his daughter. While searching the unsettling Crow Country, you'll quickly discover that there's something wrong, as there are freaky monsters wandering around the park, and the notes left behind by the staff seem to hint at a bigger plot surrounding the park. Crow Country feels like an old-school PS1 survival horror game. The developers wear their inspirations on their sleeve, with developer Adam Vian citing Resident Evil 2, Silent Hill, and Final Fantasy VII as having inspired the game. All of which, by the way, are so incredibly up my alley that it feels like this game was made to cater specifically to my tastes, but I digress. Although Crow Country feels like a PS1 horror game with its aesthetic and game design, in many ways it feels like a natural graduation from the limitations of the past. While many gamers struggle going back to classic Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Crow Country's design feels like it takes the best of both classic and modern game design to create a game that feels fun to play and really special. I think Chris Person's review of Crow Country for Aftermath phrases Crow Country's accomplishments in this area best, saying, "It is not an accurate recreation of the games of the early PlayStation and 64 era. Instead, it's what most people remember in their mind's eye, and ultimately, that's what it should be." Crow Country does not use fixed camera angles or pre-rendered backgrounds. While the option for tank controls is there, because of the 3D camera, you can also easily play with regular controls. Crow Country, while taking inspiration from old-school survival horror game design, does not limit itself by adhering to it. Instead, what you get is a game that feels much more intuitive than the rigid angles and movement of the PS1 era. Crow Country is also significantly more accessible compared to older games of the genre. Of course, this is in many ways a natural progression of game design and our culture's increasing focus on accessibility. However, you can tell that there was a very purposeful decision on the developers' part to make their game as accessible as possible, a sentiment that wasn't common during the 90s. Crow Country features both a classic survival horror mode and an exploration mode. Survival horror mode is what you would expect. Enemies attack you, obstacles can harm you, you take damage, and you'll likely need to engage in combat at some point. Exploration mode, however, removes all enemies and dangers from the amusement park, allowing you to explore at your own pace and focus primarily on puzzle solving and engaging with the story that is unfolding. In many ways, Crow Country does an astounding job of both appealing to gamers that love classic survival horror, while also making space for newcomers to the genre that may be more interested in exploration and puzzle solving than shooting monsters. Another example of this has to do with the hint system. If you're ever unsure what to do next in the game, you have the option of redeeming a hint from a fortune-telling machine you can find within the park. You are limited to 10 hints, however, in most cases you likely won't feel the need to use it more than a few times. The only aspect of the game design in Crow Country that didn't feel as intuitive to me was the combat. While this didn't hinder my experience with the game, there were times I was trying to shoot an enemy and I felt like the aiming was more rigid than I would have liked. The combat is only one part of the game though, and there's much more to talk about. The puzzles in this game were very enjoyable to me. While they may be too easy for some gamers, I found them to be nearly perfect in terms of difficulty. Remember that piano puzzle in Silent Hill? Luckily, none of the puzzles in Crow Country are that challenging. Much of Crow Country's game design revolves around finding items and information that will allow you to access new areas, find more items, find more information, and repeat the cycle. If you're feeling extra keen, however, there are bonus puzzles that aren't required for you to complete the game, but doing them can unlock more items as a reward. Moving on, I want to spend some time talking a little bit more about the presentation of the game. When I first saw an image for Crow Country, I immediately was reminded of the blocky characters of the original Final Fantasy VII, a game that is very nostalgic for me. While people have varying opinions on how Final Fantasy VII has aged in its aesthetics, Crow Country looks like if Final Fantasy VII was just a bit more proportional and easy to look at. I absolutely adore the aesthetics of Crow Country. Not just the character models, but the 3D environments that, while being reminiscent of generations past, look so much smoother and polished. Crow Country looks absolutely gorgeous. The music in Crow Country is also a highlight of the game for me. Composed by Ackroyd, the soundtrack features various songs that are standouts. The song that plays in the save areas is a particular highlight of the soundtrack for me. The save areas, in general, I believe, are some of the best examples of how Crow Country excels in creating an atmosphere that feels both nostalgic and new. In areas where you can save, the music will shift to a song that is more calming while still retaining a feeling of unease, similar in many ways to Resident Evil's save rooms. There is comfort in being able to pause for a moment, but also the knowledge that to continue, you will need to move on. You will always save while gazing into flames of some kind, such as a fireplace. I enjoyed this consistency with the imagery of always saving while being near fire in one form or another. Variations, such as a fireplace in one area or a bonfire pit in another, provides a varied yet consistent vibe each time you save your game. While the main draw of Crow Country for myself was the aesthetics and horror, I found myself really enjoying the characters as well. There will be no spoilers in this video, just some general thoughts on the story and characters, so don't worry. I was pleasantly surprised by how goofy a lot of the characters were for a horror game. You meet a variety of characters on your journey, and all of them have very distinct personalities and quirks. They have different backgrounds and reasons for being in Crow Country. You wouldn't think there would be such variety exploring an abandoned amusement park filled with monsters, but apparently some people are into that. Another way that Crow Country shows improvement from PS1 era games is how there is no rough translation errors or stilted, campy voice acting. Anyway, I love the dialogue between characters, and our main character Mara is a joy to play as. As for the story of Crow Country, it's told with both environmental storytelling, done by the variety of notes you can find scattered around the park, detailing the park's past, as well as inside information that was being kept hidden by the park's staff. The story is also told while interacting with the aforementioned cast of characters. The story doesn't go as psychological as Silent Hill or Final Fantasy VII, but takes more inspiration from Resident Evil, with being more so about physical horrors. I enjoyed uncovering the secrets of the park, learning about the mind of Edward Crow, and even being thrilled with Mara's development as a character. Crow Country had a mystery that will keep you intrigued, and characters that make the journey all the more fun. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I've played a variety of old-school survival horror games these last few years. Silent Hill, Resident Evil, and now Crow Country. If you or someone you know is interested in the genre and has little to no experience with it, I would highly recommend Crow Country. Its accessibility features are great for creating an experience that works for you. Plays, feels, and looks better than the survival horror games of old. While other aspects of the game, such as sound, characters, or story, are more subjective in how they compare to the 90s, I personally loved what Crow Country had to offer in all departments. The power that indie developers such as SFB Games holds is that they do not have to answer to shareholders, higher-ups, or industry trends. Being free to create whatever you desire can lead to both new and old, or a combination of both kinds of ideas. The evolution of video games provides us with unique opportunities to take inspiration from the past while also moving the medium forward. Crow Country is a brilliant case study in creating a game that doesn't necessarily feel like a retro game, but rather how we remembered them feeling back in the day. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time!